Hey, what's going on YouTube? It's your boy Keith the Guy, and we got some fish to fry. Let me show you a tab that will usually be grayed out if you were to have like an H.265 or an H.264 type of video, which would be the camera raw area. As you can see, it's not grayed out anymore because Davinci Resolve recognizes that this is camera raw, and we're going to adjust a few things. Now the next thing we're going to do is actually go into color management, go to Davinci YRGB, leave it at Rec 709, Gamma 2.4, and we're not even going to touch the nodes yet. We're going to stick to this tab, and the first thing we're going to do is change this from full resolution Resolve over to full resolution Canon. And then now all these things that were once upon a time grayed out are visible, and you can adjust to your liking. So the next thing we're going to do is move over onto this side. Now this is kind of what we would do if we were to color space transform it like we usually do with our H.265 footage, but we're actually going to manually do it here, which I feel like is far better because you got far more control. And this is the reason why people actually shoot in RAW. You can have the capabilities of adjusting so many things. You can even adjust your ISO. That is pretty fascinating, and that's a pretty cool thing for a consumer-based camera such as the R5 to have the capacity to do. So we're gonna go ahead and mess around with these parameters and get them to a liking that we enjoy. So we're gonna go ahead and switch over to waveform. As you can see, we have a lot of dynamic range to play with. So the first thing I usually like to do is bring in the saturations, the contrast, and the luminance together. So we're gonna go ahead and attack the contrast first. So we're gonna bring it to a tasty place, and I'm thinking 75 is pretty good. Let's go ahead and adjust it to 75. I'm liking it there. Now the image is looking a little crushed, but that's okay because we're gonna adjust it as we keep going. So now that we got our contrast in, let's go ahead and dial in some saturation. Now this is kind of a night scene, so I don't really need too much saturation. I wanna keep it looking like the nighttime. And apparently night scenes don't have as much saturation as they would in daytime scenes. At least that's what I noticed in a lot of, Hollywood-based films. So we're gonna go ahead and bring this up to, I'm liking 5.5. Now, if we go back to our vector scope and see what it's doing, let's go ahead and bring it back to 0. It's a little smidge. You're not really gonna notice, but we're gonna bring it back to 5.5. And then we're gonna go ahead and mess with the color boost, and I'm going to add a little bit in. Now 8 is too strong and 6 is too weak. So I'm actually going to do in between like 7.3, and I'm liking it there. And then the next thing we're going to do is actually mess with the exposure. So we're going to go back to our waveform to see exactly what we're doing. And then I'm going to go ahead and bring up the exposure. I'm liking 0.16. Okay, now that we kind of did what color space transform would do, we can mess around with everything else. So the next thing we're gonna actually do is kind of adjust the color temperature. I'm thinking it's a little too warm, so I'm gonna cool it down to like 50.61. Now it didn't make a huge difference, but I like it where it's at right now. Okay, now that we got our histogram pulled up, the next thing we're gonna do is adjust our tint a little bit. And I know I wanna add more green look to it. So I'm actually going to shift it. Now it's a little too intense at -5. So I'm just gonna go ahead and dial it in. I'm gonna do, let's see what -3 looks like. Now let's do -3.45. Now dialing in some of that green tint look is giving that sick murky look, which is what I'm looking for because this is kind of like a horror thriller. By the way, this is a short film that's going to be coming out pretty soon that I am directing and editing. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe so you can always stay tuned with the latest things that I do. So the next thing we're going to do is we're actually going to sharpen up our image. So I'm going to go ahead and put it at 0.15, and then I'm actually going to bring down the highlight a lot. Now, let's go to the waveform so I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm gonna go ahead and put 0 again, and then I'm gonna bring down the highlight. I want it to stay looking dark. Now, I know as a lot of beginners, we get very scared when we mess with the exposure because we're kind of afraid that it may look too dark on other monitors. But one thing that I learned specifically from one of the YouTubers that I love to watch, Colin Kelly, is sometimes it's not even your fault. It's what they're watching their image on. Some people have very old monitors, so it looks very dark on their end. And that's why it's always super important to pay attention to your scopes to know exactly scientifically what you're doing. I'm gonna go ahead and put it at -58. Take away some more highlights because I want to keep that shadow on his face so it can kind of give like a dark, evil look. As a matter of fact, speaking of shadows, I'm actually going to bring the shadows down a little bit more too. Probably like -14.5. I'm liking it there. And, you know, I'm actually kind of satisfied here. And just as I mentioned before, it's looking a little dark. Don't worry, we're good. So now that we're done with the camera raw section, we're actually going to go ahead and mess with our nodes now. Now we're going to move over to our color wheels, our primaries. Now you can go ahead and dabble with the HDR if you want to get more intricate with your exposures along with your saturations. But I'm going to keep it very simple today, and I'm just going to attack my color wheels. And the first thing I want to do is actually shift some blue into my lift, and I'm going to shift some orange into my gamma, and I'm gonna shift some orange into my gain. I'm gonna move it more to the red part, the red orange compared to the orange yellow in the gamma. And that's all I'm gonna really do when it comes down to this node. And I'm gonna go ahead and name this orange teal. And now I'm gonna go ahead and create another node by pressing Option S. And I'm gonna go ahead and name this exposure, so I can adjust my exposures a little bit. And I'm gonna go ahead and mess with the color wheels again. I'm gonna go ahead and go back to the orange teal, and I'm realizing it's a little too strong. So I'm actually going to mess with the key, and instead of making it at 1 at full strength, I'm gonna do it at 0.25, and it kind of shaved off some of that intensity. And we're gonna go back to our exposure. We're gonna adjust our exposure because, as I mentioned before, it's a little too dark. So we're gonna go ahead and bring up the gamma to like 0.7 actually. Yep, I'm liking it at 0.7. And then the next thing I'm gonna do is actually go ahead and press Option S as well. And I'm actually gonna use a third-party plugin called Dehancer. If you guys don't have it already, it's amazing. It's a film emulation plugin. I think it's fairly priced for what it's worth. And you always want to be a person who keeps adding on to their arsenal to make their color grading a little quicker. And I just love the parameters that Dehancer utilizes. So we're going to go ahead and go to effects. As you can see, it already slapped on a film emulation look for me. And I'm actually going to turn that off because I'm not going to be using any of those old style film looks. And if you didn't notice, it added a little bit of grain as well too. I actually want to remove that as well, probably dial it in later, but for now, I don't like looking at film grain as I'm adjusting my colors. So I'm going to go ahead and turn that off, and then we're going to start from square one. Now that we're using raw footage and our timeline is at Rec 709, I'm gonna go ahead and leave it at Rec 709. We're actually gonna go into Film Developer, and then we're going to enable it. And I'm just gonna add a little bit more contrast to my image to like 8.3. And then the next thing I'm gonna do is bring these up. I'm gonna skip film compression, and I'm gonna go over to expand, which is going to actually mess with the high point and the low point of your image when it comes down to exposure. And I'm gonna leave the color mode to normal, and I'm gonna pay attention to my scopes once again, and we're gonna adjust it to our liking. So I'm actually going to adjust my black point. And as you can see, it kind of shifts the waveform a little bit, and I'm gonna dial it all the way back to like 2.8. And now I'm gonna adjust my white point. I think this is what's gonna make a significant difference in our image to like 9.2. So I went ahead and brightened up our image a little bit. And I'm gonna go over to print, and I'm gonna leave it at linear, and I'm not gonna mess with that either. And we're gonna go ahead and go into color head. This is where the magic kind of happens. So we're gonna go ahead and enable it. And usually I like to mess with the yellow, blue, magenta, and the cyan, but for today, we're only going to be utilizing the tones. So I'm going to see if I can dial in some blue in my shadows by moving this over to the left, and negative 10.1 is fine. And I'm gonna add some more orange by shifting my midtones to the right. I'm liking 8.3, and then we're going to just mess with the highlights a little bit, dial it back because the orange is a little strong, and we're gonna leave that at negative 2.8. And then now we're going to just bring the film grain away, and we're going to add some halation because there's some light going on, and I usually like leaving it at 65-70, and then we're going to add some bloom. And then if you go into mask mode, it'll tell you exactly what's being affected, and we're going to actually put that at 65-70 as well. And there you go. That is how I went ahead and got this look for this particular image. There's many ways to go about editing raw footage, but that's basically how I edit my raw footage. And if you guys found this video fruitful in any type of way, why don't you go ahead and like, share, and subscribe? It shows me that you guys raw footage. Well, this is it. We just fried some fish. My real name's Kit. It be that's it. Deuces.